Hey, everybody, welcome to the Entrepreneur Motivation Podcast. I am your host, Chris Bello, and this is a little bit of a different episode. I actually had a chance to meet a multimillionaire named Trey Stone through my childhood friends' parents' new house. So basically, my childhood friends built this beautiful new house in this great neighborhood with a ton of amazing homes. And their neighbor happens to be a multifamily real estate investor. He owns several apartment complexes in the Houston area. And so I went to my friend's, his sister's baby shower at that new house, and I got introduced to their neighbor, shook hands, we exchanged contact information, we grabbed coffee the following week, and lo and behold, a few months later, after all the holidays, he invited me over to be on his radio show. So this is the Real Estate Riches radio show. We have a conversation. We kind of talk about his story a little bit and how he's acquired his wealth and his knowledge. And I ask a couple of questions in there as well as kind of chime in on my story in a way. So it's just more like a conversational thing, getting to know each other. But we got to hang out at his home office. We spent 2 or 3 hours together. And now that's turned into something where I may be able to actually work with him and help him out down the road in exchange for some sort of mentorship. He also gave me this book that I plan on reading here soon called The Complete Guide to Buying and Selling Apartment Buildings. Again, that's how he made his wealth. So he's kind of pointing me in a direction and telling me, hey, he sees a lot of himself in me when he was my age, and he kind of just wants to mentor me in a way. And in exchange, of course, I may be able to help him maybe grow his social media presence and get his podcast growing, and maybe even help syndicate deals, as in raising some money for future investment properties that he goes into. So in any case, I'm going to roll the replay from his radio show. Again, that's Real Estate Riches Radio. I'll drop all the links in the show notes if you want to connect with Trey, if you want to listen to his podcast or his radio show. And yeah, if you have any questions at all, feel free to reach out to me or to Trey directly. And again, I'll put all that info in the show notes. But with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and roll that episode now.
And welcome to the show. This is Real Estate Riches Radio. I'm your host, as always, Trey Stone. Great to have you. For any of you that are tuning in, and for this first opportunity, join a buddy of mine's podcast. We meet you for the first time, so welcome to the show through Chris. But my guest today, I'm really excited to have here in my home studio on the show. His name is Chris Bello. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Trey. Great to be here.
Absolutely. So for those of you that have never heard the show before, if our commercial there at the beginning didn't lay it out, what I've done over the years, I started off in single family when I was in college at the University of Texas. And then I went out and I bought just apartment complex after apartment complex and kind of made every mistake that you can make along the way and got a little better and a little better at it until eventually I've now done a few $100 million worth of those properties. And I've served as the 2014 president of the Houston Apartment Association, actually a guy that I've known since he was a teenager. His first involvement in multifamily was his parents investing with me in a couple of different apartment complexes. He actually just came out this month on the cover of the Abode magazine, which is the Houston Apartment Association magazine. So if a listener hasn't ever heard of that before and you want to learn more about investing, real estate investing in apartments, go pick it up. But it was kind of surreal seeing John's face there as the incoming president, because I remember when I was like, trying to help mentor him a little bit, and some other friends of mine were doing that even to a much greater extent. And he was just this really curious, fresh-faced, kid that was coming in wanting to get directly into the multifamily industry and, kind of learning from his parents' investments, then doing his own deals. And then I remember when I was at the Apartment Association kind of bringing him in and saying, hey, I want to get you more involved. Let's put you on this committee, put you on that one. And I actually got some pushback from a couple of people at the Apartment Association at the time, because some of those committees were, committees that generally people have been around volunteering, through the different involvement with the association, maybe 10, 15 years to get to the point where they might be in some of those roles. And they say, the guy's kind of young, I don't know. I'm like, trust me, he's going to bring so much to the table. And then here we are, what feels like 5 minutes later, and he's the new president of the Apartment Association. So congratulations to you, John Boryak, buddy of mine. Hope to see you and Caitlin soon. And the reason I bring him up is that's what this show is about, is, whether using John as an example, my buddy Paul Prince, who learned to buy his first deal by working with me in that deal and then invested in several deals with me, and then now has bought a couple of apartment complexes on his own. My buddy Gary Blumberg, who had been in the real estate industry for a long time, but had run big national multifamily management operations without ever being an owner. Worked with me for a few years, and then now he's done several apartment complexes on his own, and he's been a guest on this show. And that podcast, that episode is available on our website. I just feel like it relates to not only what the whole show is about, which is I want to teach people how to build wealth by investing in real estate, specifically the little niche that I know something about, which is investing in apartments. And it brings me back to that because I see you in that same way, Chris. I told you this before, and not trying to blow smoke up your skirt or anything, but for the first time that I met you, I just felt you had a great energy, and you just came across as someone that was very authentic and very genuine. And you don't always get that from somebody, these days, but especially someone like you that's got your own podcast, you're developing a following, and, you're just a guy that's, as my attorney, Bonnie Spencer, likes to say, you're a man on the make. You're in the process of going out there and starting your wealth and your journey. So for people that are listening to the show, I think today is a great example of what I love about our industry, which is there are so many people that did this for me, what I'm hoping to do for you, Chris, which is they're just willing to come in and help you. And you're kind of like, why? I used to feel where you'll be at one level, like I owned single family rental properties already when I first started, like you do now. And then I was getting into apartments, and they would just take me under the wing and just help me with stuff. But it's because we've made those mistakes that you make as a new investor. We know the pain and the loss that comes from that, and then the triumph when you figure out how to do it right and actually make money. And you want to see the next guy, succeed, and you want to see them avoid some of that if you can kind of help do it. And I predict, as I predicted with John, I predict with you that sometime, in the next decade, closer to the beginning of that period than the end of it, but certainly before the end of it, that you'll be teaching people about investing in apartments. I make that prediction now. We'll see if it's true, but I really believe it's the case. So if you're just tuning into the show, if you want to learn more about it or get copies of today's episode, I promise I'll shut up in a minute and turn it over to Chris, but I just want to tell you where to go do that. You can go to our website. It's realestateriches.com, and right there you can find access to all the different shows. We've got them on Google Podcasts, Spotify, you get Apple Music, all the different, Libsyn. These are all the different ways that you can download podcasts if you want to listen. And Chris, if people want to go watch this on your podcast or listen to it, how do they find your website, your podcast, or your video version that you've convinced me to tape? I've never done this on video before, but here we are. So Where do people find that?
So you can download that episode and listen to it at the Entrepreneur Motivation Podcast, also available on all platforms. I also have a YouTube channel, and then if you visit my personal website, just my name, chrisbello.com, that's another great place to connect with us and get access to all the content.
Awesome. So I kind of want to talk about how you and I met for a minute, and then I'd like you to tell our listeners a little bit about your journey, and then we'll get into some specifics, because a lot of people tune into my show and they tell me after they email me and they say, hey, I heard the show and I want to come invest with you. I want to get in a deal, because people that listen to my show oftentimes wind up investing with me into an apartment complex. That's why I do the show. Other than it being fun, a great way to educate people, I raise money to invest in multifamily. I've owned thousands of units on my own with no partners at all. And then I've owned thousands of units with people as investors with me. So as they email me, they contact me. Usually we get together in person. We go walk through one of my properties. They meet my employees and coworkers and so forth, and kind of learn more about my operation. And we get to know each other. One of the things they say is, Trey, I liked your show. The reason I followed up with you is because every once in a while in your show, you actually give out real content. You actually give out real answers. You actually talk about specifics of things that you do with these properties and how I would invest in my first one, etc. And they say that there's a real lack of that in a lot of the other real estate guru programs and books and authors and seminars that you go to. A lot of the people who do those don't actually live off of the income from their real estate. They live off of the income from their books and tapes and seminars. And if they live off of both, right, if they're both making them a lot of money, that's great. Sadly, though, the vast majority of them couldn't pay their monthly bills tomorrow from their real estate portfolio. It's all coming from teaching other people how to build a real estate portfolio. And I kind of think that unless you've actually done it, you're not in the best position to teach somebody else how to do it in the most expedient manner, right? Or at least not when you're pretending to be a guru based on that. And so what I like to do in the show is try to find some specific questions that we can get to. And I think that you'll be a great source for those because you're in that transition period as an entrepreneur of growing from single family residential to commercial or multifamily properties. You have those aspirations. So I'm going to assume you've got some questions for me that I can get into. And in helping you a little bit live while we're on the air, I hope I'm helping somebody who's listening to the show, even if they never wind up investing with me or investing with you, just if they can take something away from it, then hey, we got something done today. So I first met you at my next door neighbor's house. To me, it was like the grand opening sort of move-in party for his house, but actually it was a baby shower, but he had just finished it. And I've been watching him build this amazing home for the past few years. And it's just, I feel like we were walking through the Versace mansion. I mean, that place, it makes my house look like an outhouse. Like, it's unbelievable. And I met you there, and we were actually touring the master bedroom, and Ron and Sheila were showing us that. And I mean, the ceilings are like, how many feet high would you say that is? Right above the tub.
Oh gosh, I have no idea. It was like a cathedral in there.
It feels like 50 feet taller, right? I mean, whatever we're going to say is going to sound like an exaggeration, but it's actually...
It's true.
It's exactly what it was. And then, we for some reason met there for a moment, and I heard you were investing and working in real estate, and just thought, I got a feeling that maybe we could work together in some way. Maybe I could just help you in some way. And then lo and behold, I find out you're running a successful podcast and got to know a little more about you. And you went to A&M, where most of my friends, went to college, the ones that went to college anyway, from where I grew up. Whereas I went to UT, so we always had kind of a friendly rivalry there. You worked in some oil and gas, and then now you've landed in real estate. So that's how we met. If you would, I think for our listeners that are listening today going, all right, I listened to the show to learn how to invest in real estate. Now that Trey's yapped for 10 minutes, I want to learn something specific that I can go do. Let's talk about, like, how did you make that transition from corporate America? What kind of led to it, your family or background, to shift from a Fortune 500 company where you're working in oil and gas to now having your own business and working on not only building up your clientele as a broker, but also building up, working toward your own real estate portfolio, building wealth for yourself and other people, because that takes a certain amount of guts to go from one to the other. And then let's talk about, like, what do you want to know? Pretend like we're not friends yet and that we were just meeting at an industry function, and you had your notepad, you're going to get 5 minutes with me, and you're like, okay, maybe this guy's full of it, maybe he's not, but he's done thousands and thousands of units. Like, what are the things that you would ask? Because if I can answer those questions and give you any value today on the show, then somebody listening is going to take that value away as well. But before we hear your question, just let people know who you are, your background, and how'd you make that transition? Because I've met so many people that's their first question. They hear me on the radio, they come, they sit down, they go, man, I'm excited I can invest in this deal with you, Trey, but I would love to be able to invest in enough of these things that I didn't have to work at my corporate job anymore, and I could do what you're doing and live off of my real estate. But gosh, I don't know how to make that transition. So I want them to hear your story, because you're a young guy and you're doing it.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to share my story. So when I go on other shows and I talk to people and they ask that quick question, summarize your life so far, how did you get to where you are? And I'm by no means where I'd like to be, but I am noticeably further than when I started a few years ago. So like you said, I went to A&M, I studied supply chain, and my story doesn't really even start until after that, because I was kind of just doing what my parents told me. I went to this school. Like I told you, I went to a Catholic school my whole life, went to an all-boys Jesuit high school. A lot of my friends went to Texas A&M or to University of Texas here in Texas. Those are big schools. Went that route, studied business. Oh, oil and gas, that's pretty big in Texas. Let me get into that. And so 3.5 years in, I kept seeing the managers and directors and like what they were doing and how long they were working. And I started to run the numbers. I'm like, they can't be getting paid that much money at that level, even though they're working here who knows how many hours for the company. And so I started reading books like you have on your bookshelf upstairs, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, 4-Hour Work Week. And I started to think of ideas. I got to get out of this place, right? I can come up with ideas and I can work for myself. And coincidentally, actually, your neighbor's son, one of my best childhood friends, we came up with an invention idea. We filed a patent on it, and we were trying to get that manufactured. And I had quit my job to go all in on this thing. And after shelling out about 40 grand, I think, on my half, I kind of pulled the plug on it because I just had no income source, and I was quickly sinking money into intellectual property and into the manufacturing costs of a product that was not quite working the way we had intended. And so I kind of saw the light at the end of the tunnel on that thing at the time being. And so I didn't even get into real estate right away. I struggled with a couple of ideas, but I loved this idea of entrepreneurship, doing what I want, being at the gym at 9 a.m. instead of at the desk. And so I started listening to podcasts, and I came across Bigger Pockets. And I heard a founder, and we talked about this when we got coffee probably a few months back. There was a local house buying company that had been doing very well after Harvey. A lot of people were selling their homes as is. And so I heard this podcast on Bigger Pockets of a Houston-based company, and I thought, one of the owners went to Texas A&M. This is my key. This is my foot in the door. I reached out. I called them. I submitted a form. I said I was going to get an opportunity to work with them one way or the other. Sure enough, they didn't even have a position, but they made one for me because of my persistence. And I kind of put my tail between my legs. I realized I needed a mentor. And I was okay going back to work for a company, even though it had a small startup feel. It didn't feel like Fortune 500. There were Grant Cardone and motivational posters everywhere, and I felt like that's where I could fit in. And so fast forward from there, a year there, I got my real estate license. I've had record months in 2020, and of course I'm rolling into 2021 with 9 or 10 deals under contract. So this is how I've kind of gotten into real estate. I've done a few wholesales in between. I have a property out in East Downtown. I'm actually in the process of selling that property, but now with what I know and with the relationships that I've been making, meeting people such as yourself, I'm in a position where I feel like I have the knowledge, I have the resources and the motivation to achieve much larger goals.
Okay, great. Well, I love the fact that you admit that you took the leap and it kind of, hit bottom a little bit on it. Like everybody likes to tell the stories where they take that leap of faith and then you'll spread your wings and soar. And every once in a while, not at first, right? Sometimes we just fall, the wings don't work yet,
right.
But you climb back up and you do it again. And that's what you're doing now. So
Absolutely.
I guess with your single family aspirations, I understand that you're obviously selling homes. I'm assuming that there's probably a range from the stuff like you were doing on the wholesaling side, which might be more investment properties that need work, that might not be as grand, all the way up to maybe some high-end stuff. We certainly met in a very high-end home. I think that just the interior finishes of Ron and Sheila's house are probably worth more than the entire neighborhood where I grew up. Certainly they're worth more than the trailer park was next door to my house. But I just want to kind of hear a little bit more about what your plans are. I know you have plans beyond single family, but tell our listeners, if you would, and I suppose yours through your podcast here we're doing together, if you would just talk a little bit about what your goals are on the single family side and where you're at in that journey. And then let's talk about where you'd like to go stepping into the commercial or multifamily side.
Sounds good. So when we got coffee a few months back, we talked about single family, and I've got several friends that are ready to give me money. They want me to find the deals. They want me to do the work and run point on them. And you kind of had me thinking a little bit, hey, if I could skip single family and go straight to the multifamily, that may be the better way to go. Less headaches. If there's a vacancy, I don't have to worry about it versus a house where if there's a vacancy, there's no money coming in for that property. And so you started to kind of get my gears turning a little bit. And I brought that idea to a few of my friends who were willing to give me the capital. And they did bring up a good point that the biggest challenge is, well, the knowledge, right? How do we actually do that? Don't you need millions of dollars to buy apartment complexes? And how do you actually proceed with that? Versus a single family, I think a lot of people can feel like that's within grasp. I have a friend who bought 3 or 4 within the last year or two with a regular day job. He lived in one unit of a duplex, rented the other out, using that BRRRR strategy, getting rental income, rehabbing, renting out, and then refinancing and repeating that process. I think Bigger Pockets talks a lot about that BRRRR strategy. So doing that, he bought 3 or 4 properties. I've got several friends that have a similar story. But at the same time, there's challenges. You can't scale as quickly. And so while I did have aspirations to, and I still maybe do, to have a few rental properties, maybe I'm not really 100% all in on growing to 50 rental properties that are single family versus just a couple of multifamily. And so whenever we met, I was thinking, like, this is a great opportunity to learn how to do this, because this is not something that you just pick up a textbook and learn how to do in one weekend. It's actually something you've done for decades. And so I really would love to just tap into that experience and get my foot in the door of acquiring commercial properties, apartment families, and being in the real estate game, but just at a higher level.
Well, awesome. I'm glad that you were leaning that way or thinking about that. Maybe I'm helping you, make that choice at that fork in the road. I think that, one of the things that I learned when I got into single family properties is that I felt like, well, in single family, I'm going to have a lot less risk. And a lot of people feel that way just because there's less zeros attached to the numbers. But what I found in real life, having owned rent houses and having owned thousands of units of apartment complexes at the same time, is that actually in some ways you have more risk with the houses. Because as you kind of alluded to at one point in your comments there, if you have 5 rental properties and one tenant moves out, then right now you just lost 20% of the income and 20% of the occupancy. So my producer here in the studio with me, I'm going to look at him for a minute, have him turn his mic up. So Bobby, I think, we can see you on camera on the podcast there too. Wave cool. To your fans. But so Bobby, let's talk about you as an example. So you've got 2 rental properties, right?
Yes.
And with those 2 rental properties, where are they located?
One in San Antonio and Bexar County, and one in Harris County here.
Exactly. And so just recently, one of my property managers and supervisors now, actually, April Conway and I, we kind of worked with you because you had a tenant that you were debating. Do I keep kind of giving him more time? He's getting behind. Do I renew him? Do I not?
Yeah.
What should I do? And so eventually you did decide to go ahead and move him out, make some needed upgrades, and then try to bring somebody in at a higher rent, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So in doing that, how much rent, would you say, assuming that he was current on his rent, how much rent did you lose by not having that tenant in there? Let's just talk about before you get the next person.
Let's just say the aggregate or the net, probably about $3,000.
About $3,000.
Yeah.
Okay. And then for your other property, how much income did you have coming in?
$1,200 a month.
$1,200 a month.
Yeah.
So together there were $3,000. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
About right. Yeah.
So it sounds like you would have lost then, in at least temporarily, until you replace that tenant, over 50% of that income.
That's right.
So here's what I think is a great example to that, Chris, is that a lot of people would think, hey, if I have $3,000 a month coming in, that's a pretty big deal. If a person's making, say, $60,000 a year, that's $5,000 a month. After taxes, that's not that different from $3,000 a month. So the idea of losing, in your case, over half of that money just by having the turnover of one tenant, that to me represents a lot more risk than if I had 10 people move out of my 1,312 units that I'm managing right now, right? So I can have 10 times the number of people, 20 times the number of people move out, and yet it's going to have a very minor impact on my income. So what I found is that, using Bobby, thank you, but
you're welcome.
As a real life,
happy to showcase my failure.
No, not a failure. Actually,
Okay.
No, quite the opposite. You were smart, and you saw that this wasn't the best fit for you,
Yes.
and then you're not being a slumlord and just moving somebody in with stuff not being in the best and most updated condition, which you could have certainly done. Instead, you're making the investment, you're upgrading, and you're going to get higher rent.
And immediately following when we're done here today, I'm driving to San Antonio to do open houses this weekend.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And you've got new appliances.
Oh, yeah.
You've got new finishes.
Yes.
So you're
And
going to
thanks
wind
to
up,
you in April.
glad to hear we were
amazing.
able to help.
Oh, good Lord.
So it's and we helped you with that conversation, I think, to have the courage to move the guy out. To give you an idea of how much that risk is, Chris, when Bobby and I were talking about it before he made that choice, I could tell that he actually was experiencing a degree of fear about even talking to the guy and saying, sorry, but I can't have you continue not to pay your rent on time. You're going to have to move out. Because he felt like, what if the guy's vindictive? What if he destroys my property? This is going to be, what if it's a lawsuit? All those things. And I think I freaked him out a little bit because I picked up my phone. I said, well, what's the guy's number?
I'll call
It
him
wasn't
right
a
now.
little bit. It was a lot.
And I wasn't. No. And was I kidding?
No, we weren't kidding.
I was going to call the guy right
He
then.
was.
Because it's just, the more you do it, the less anxiety that you have about doing it. And it wasn't about humiliating anybody.
No.
Actually, the conversation was, how much time do you need? What can we figure out where you're going to be finding a place that you can afford? If you need to get out a little bit early in the lease, we're going to work with you.
Yes.
It was a non-confrontational conversation, was it not?
Very much so, yeah.
And at the end of the day, I don't think you burned bridges with that family. Am I
No,
right?
we did not. No.
And so a lot of people perceive all of this safety with single family, but just in that little microcosm, in that example with Bobby, it's actually sometimes kind of the opposite. Another difference is, why would it be that Bobby would have that anxiety? I wouldn't. Well, because when you're operating single family for a long time as you're building up critical mass, you better have a day job. because that's not going to pay all your bills because he also has a mortgage offsetting that income, right? So the point that I'm making is that that's why Bobby, working full-time in radio, production, being a program director, being a general manager, hosting and producing shows like the one that he's producing for me right now, that's an income that was going to pay his bills. The other was sort of a side hustle, right? And the problem with side hustles is you rarely develop the professional skill set that you need to make the same decisions that you would make if you did all day, every day, all day long. So that's the difference, is that having run 7,000 units and having been president of the apartment association and having been able to just dive in and immerse myself all day, all the time in the apartment business now for a couple of decades, for me to pick up that phone and make that phone call and actually have it be a positive, friendly, let's work together, this doesn't need to be negative conversation with no anxiety and no negativity, is there's a reason why I can have that conversation and Bobby couldn't. Yeah. And it was because this is what I do full time. Can you see how difficult it is to get from that side hustle to full time, one rent house at a time?
Yes.
I mean, even if it's going to make you a couple $100 a month, that's a lot of houses if you have a nice lifestyle to make you feel like, I'm doing well enough, let me quit my job and just do that. On the other hand, apartment complexes. I have friends of mine that the first apartment complex they ever bought retired them. And they're done.
Wow.
They did a deal and they were finished. They replaced their income in one transaction. Now, would they have the same anxiety Bobby had at the first, couple of encounters? Absolutely. But it forces you, because you're doing it on a larger scale, to get past that. I also have other friends that did the same thing. They retired themselves in one deal, or in other cases, a number of deals, but they never had to make those calls themselves. Why? Because at the apartment complex, you have enough economy of scale that you can actually bring in a full team. So if you go up to my property off 1960 and 45, where I have 560 units, I have about 13 people working there, right? So you're going to meet my manager, my assistant manager, my leasing agents, plural. You're going to meet my lead maintenance, my assistant lead maintenance. You're going to meet our make-ready technicians. You're going to meet our porter and housekeeper. You're going to meet our security team. There's a whole team of people there. And even better than that, at these large apartment complexes, you're going to have to underwrite. You have no choice. The lender is going to force you to underwrite a property management fee. So then you have another opportunity to say, how active or how passive do I want to be? So what I want to influence you to do, Chris, especially getting into this with maybe some friends and family money as you start out, is I want you to get into it, and I want you to be the property management company. We're going to start an LLC for you. That's going to be your entity that does all the property management. It'll be totally different from the one that actually owns the property. And I'm going to help you, and I'm going to get you into the right programs through the apartment association as well. And you'll have that team of people that have been doing this all day, every day to make you feel better about it. But then at the same time, you'll be learning because you own the management company too. Now, I've had other people that I've worked with where I've said that's the worst thing you could possibly do. For a lot of dentists and attorneys and doctors and engineers that I've worked with that have no intention of leaving their career, it would be insane for them to do that. They're going to go through this huge learning curve while probably failing, trying to juggle that with that other full-time gig, right? Mm-hmm. You as a real estate broker, you have this flexibility with your schedule where you can kind of move that around. So you're going to mitigate the risk by having a mentor. You're going to mitigate the risk by having the economies of scale, buying actually a larger property where individual move-outs don't really threaten your bottom line. In fact, guess what? You budget for those move-outs as part of the operating expenses you budgeted when you bought the property. And you budget for the property management company, even if you're the one collecting that fee. For those people, I have them pay that fee to a third-party property management company. So not only does the on-site team have all that experience, and they've been doing this a long time, even if you're a first-time owner, but now they have supervisors, people in accounting, operations, marketing, HR, that are actually at a corporate office for that management company who often have decades of experience as well. And then that person doesn't have to leave their full-time job to go become a property management expert. Now, everybody that I help at this point in the process where you are right now, that I tell them what I just told you, they always have the same question. They say, well, does it really make sense for me to go spend all my time starting a property management company, learning all that? Why don't I just leverage that? If that's already in the numbers anyway, Trey, Why would you tell me to do that myself? Why don't I just go hire, Greystar? They're great. They're fantastic. I have a bunch of friends that work there. Biggest property management company for apartments in America, one of the biggest in the world. I know exactly who you would call. He's one of my best friends, family members. He's his brother-in-law. We've traveled together, play horseshoes together, all those things. I give you the number today if you want. And his name is Mac Armstrong. He's amazing, and their team is amazing. But the reason I would tell you not to is because you're young, you're hungry, you have the time, you're self-employed. This is for you a career, not a side hustle. This isn't how you're going to take your earned income and then invest that to build passive income to complement your earned income. This is going to be your livelihood. So if you outsource that, yeah, you could do more deals faster, but at the expense of not getting to learn firsthand. And when you've had to learn and go through that process of recruiting your first property manager, your first assistant manager, all those positions I just mentioned, and then you're doing their performance evaluations and you're doing their numbers, I'm going to have you do your accounting as well in the beginning, because by you doing all those things, nobody can ever BS you down the road. When somebody comes back and says, I'm sorry, Chris, but if you don't spend this extra money, there's no way that this property could ever be full. You remember Stephanie Graves that we had on the show, Bobby, pretty recently?
Great lady. Yes.
So Stephanie, John, I just mentioned my buddy that I originally helped mentor along with a lot of other folks and has now mentored me on a few things that's come full circle. He's president of HA this year. I was president back in 2014. Stephanie, what'd she say, Bobby? Was it 2023 that she was going to be president?
Yes, coming up. Yes.
So I called Stephanie myself. I was having one of those moments I just talked about. This is like going back a couple of years, and said, Stephanie, I've got this property, and I didn't really put as much money into it. I bought it really cheap. I could flip it now for a huge profit, but I'm thinking about holding on to it. But I'm not really sure until I can refinance, my prepayment penalty burns off of my loan. I'm not really sure that, now's the right time for me to put a bunch of money in rehabbing it, but the staff doesn't feel like we can be full without it. And she's like, all right, let me make some phone calls, because that's total BS. That property can be full. I know you're not a slumlord. I know you fix everything. You don't need to do a complete rehab, just have the property be full. We just need to do a market survey, adjust your rents and your specials to be consistent with other properties in similar condition in the area. And as long as you're not being greedy or stupid, we're going to be able to fill the property up. And we did. And she's worked with me and many other people doing that exact same thing. Now I'm actually going back, and that very same property, I'm now renovating it. And I've done some episodes about what our planned renovation is going to be. If you go back and listen to those on realestateriches.com, go to those podcast episodes, you can find it. But what I'm getting at is now we're going to go back and make those improvements, because we're going to bump the rent even more. And the property's already in the mid-90s occupancy. But the difference is, the more you immerse yourself in the business, that's how I even know to call Stephanie. That's how I had the experience when I brought in a new manager there to take the property to greater heights, to evaluate her versus other candidates. So when you use a property management company, it's a great way to go when you have no desire to make this your full-time gig, because you leverage their skills and experience, and that's a great thing. All my investors, hey, I hope they don't do what you want to go do. I want people to hear this show and say, let me just go invest with Trey. That sounds easier. But a lot of those people are people who are already retired and want to stay that way, or they're people who want to be in a few deals for a while before they go do their own by investing with me passively, or they're people who still have a full-time job and they just want to have a better outlook on their retirement by starting now to build some passive income in their portfolio. But I wouldn't trade what I learned starting my first management company, doing those rehabs myself, working with those contractors, making those mistakes, especially when you have a mentor, to make sure you don't make any fatal mistakes. So I guess I sort of took the question away by saying this is going to be your question, but you were nodding. So was I right? Would that have been your question?
Yes, that would have been my question. I mean, you answered a lot there that I probably didn't even know to ask, but I think that's one of my main things, and maybe a lot of people do that too. I sometimes outsource too soon, because that would have been something that I would have preferred to do. Well, why don't I just hire the experts? They know better than I do. But like you said, some things would come up down the road and I wouldn't even know, is that an issue or not? I find myself getting stuck with that now, even in my real estate transactions. An issue will come up. I'm not really sure what the resolution is because I didn't really pay attention to it the first time. It might have been something I delegated to a transaction coordinator. And so now I'm relying on her to fill me in on where did the ball get dropped and what do we need to do. And maybe I don't even know how to solve that problem because I hadn't taken that initiative to do it myself the first few times. And so your advice there was very sound in terms of going through it, learning it all, and understanding what to look for and what questions to ask down the road. So when I get there, I know what to look at. I know how to run the numbers and what the truth is, I guess, and have a Stephanie or whoever it is that I need to reach out to. I know who that person is.
Right. And it's funny because a lot of times we run into challenges with my employees that I know how to solve the problem, and they're very surprised because now that I've had, 7,000 units or whatever it is now and been doing this for so long, and I've been away for quite some time from being there on site every day, their assumption is, well, I'm going to know more about that than Trey's going to because I'm the one here every day. He's not doing that. But what they don't know is that for years, my first couple of properties, I did go on site every single day. And even though I owned 2 other companies at that time, my home base was at my apartment complexes. The first one I bought, I just went there every day. The second one that I bought, then I went every other day. I went back and forth. And by being there all day, every day, even also not just doing work for that, but running my other business at that time, I was able to just sort of see firsthand what worked and what didn't work and get into the nitty gritty. Hear a conversation that doesn't sound quite right to me between, let's say, my assistant manager and a resident, or between my manager and maybe one of my maintenance guys about what we were doing on something, and kind of come out of my cave and go, hey, what are y'all talking about over here? Tell me more about it. You're saying do that? Why do you think we should do that? And then kind of going through it. A good example would be, I learned a lot about boilers. I don't know anything about construction, all that background, but I know that I want to buy a Raypack, low NOx horizontal boiler system. If I have a property that's built before 1980 that has boilers and that you want to do it right, you don't just want to get talked into some sort of moderate repair if the boiler's over 10 years old, where you just go replace the motor or the combustion chamber, because when you do that, you're going to go spend several $1,000s and you're going to buy a $15,000 one anyway 2 years right down the road. I wouldn't know that if I hadn't been involved in those types of granular decisions. So now when I have an employee run into a challenge, I can be a resource to them. Because a lot of people think management goes the other direction, right? That they're there to serve me. It's far from that. I'm there to serve them. What did they need from me to be better at their job? So my employees can tell you that when we talk, I often sometimes call them because I do need to address, hey, can you give me this piece of information? Or what do you think about this? Or where are we with that project? But I always follow it up with, okay, while you have me on the phone right now, or while I'm here today, what do you need from me? What can I help you with? I'd like to say that I never fail to ask that question. And a lot of times, people that haven't worked for me very long, they think that that's sort of ceremonial or rhetorical, and they don't really tell me much. Over time, they realize that it isn't. And they say, well, as a matter of fact, do you think we could blah, 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 whatever it is? And then I'm like, absolutely, let's do it tomorrow. Or that expense is authorized today. Or, oh, no, I don't think that's the right time. I don't want to, in that example I just gave, I don't want to have you just spend $2,000 on that combustion chamber, because isn't that the one that we have when we originally bought the property, never replaced that boiler? Didn't I buy it 14 years ago? Okay, let's go ahead and just get a new one in there. Trust me. But call these 2 different companies that I've bought a lot of boilers from over the years and ask for Rick, over at Best Plumbing, Rick Gandy. And if you're calling over to Suncoast, ask for the owner there. He knows me pretty well. Get at least more than one quote so make sure we're getting a fair price, and evaluate any differences between the warranties, both from the company and the manufacturer. This is kind of about what it should be. And they're like, you know that? Like, they're surprised, right? But It's because I had to go learn it on that granular level. Now, if I really wanted to, I could outsource to a third-party management company, and I could manage my management company. But, you spoke about bigger pockets, and they had not a podcast. They had a post yesterday that popped up in my feed. And it was a guy with a beard, like a reddish beard, and he had headphones on like I have right now.
Yeah.
Did you see that post? It popped up like kind of a bluish background.
Maybe so. Was it on Facebook or was it
I think it popped up on Facebook.
Okay.
And he had like a list there that he posted of like kind of steps about, building a portfolio of single family and then going into small multifamily. And then towards the end of that maturity continuum of an investor that he was talking about, it was basically towards the bottom, like, now manage your property managers and enjoy the cash flow from your portfolio. And having been there for a while now, and having actually bought a management company where then I was running properties on a fee management basis through the executives that founded it, who then worked for me. I kind of did it Warren Buffett style, where he'll do a combination of stock and cash. He wants the CEO to stay on. They've got to run the company afterwards. I did exactly that. And the gal that ran it for me was a fellow board member of the apartment association. And then she was continuing to do her job, but just now as my partner/employee through stock and cash. And we were running properties all up and down the East Coast in 9 different states. So I've also done that, where I basically just bought lock, stock, and barrel a business, and I basically outsourced it to the business, even though I also technically owned it. It was the same people running it that would have been running it if I just would have been their client. I just wanted to own it too, right? But in that process, what I learned is that I never want to do that again. I love doing exactly what they said on Bigger Pockets, building that team of people, having learned it on the ground myself. I'm not saying I know the answer to all their questions, but at least I understand what the question is. At least I understand what the problem is, and they know that I have their back. They know that if I don't have the answer, I know someone we can go find that answer out from. I still have mentors I can still call, and that happens all the time. We had a building burn down recently. April called me up and said, we're having a big problem with people wanting to go back in the building and get all their stuff. And I understand they live paycheck to paycheck. Someone failed to get the renter's insurance. They want to go in there. But what do? The fire department just dumped 60,000 gallons of water in that building. If it collapses, somebody's going to get hurt. And so I was like, gosh, I don't know. I've never had anybody want to go back into a building that's missing a roof that just burned down to get their TV. That's kind of odd. But people are really aggressive about it. So we fenced it off and we put security out there on a 24-hour basis so nobody would get hurt. We brought in a consultant. We determined which units were still structurally safe enough to re-enter. And then we were able to get someone to accompany those folks to make sure they didn't go outside of the safer areas that were remaining in the building. And for the ones that weren't, we let them know, sorry, but it's simply not going to be safe for you or your family to be in there. And so April, by knowing that I've been in that situation, I've been on property, we've had, fires and other disasters and problems and worked through it. I've been out there putting together furniture from Mattress Mac after Katrina, while a guy played blues guitar for me. He had just moved to Houston from New Orleans because he was an evacuee from Hurricane Katrina. And he's like, man, I don't have any money to give you, but y'all are letting us get in the city voucher program, get an apartment here. You're letting me come in, live at this place, and you're an owner of the property. You're out here assembling because he was disabled, so he couldn't assemble the furniture. It came in boxes from Gallery Furniture. And so I was like, well, I'm going to go help put it together. So, we're doing that. He's like, but what I can do for you is I can sing and play for you. And I was thinking, well, okay. Holy crap, this guy was like an amazing blues singer and guitar player. And he's just sitting there, and I'm like, man, I think I want to put this together a little slower. I'm kind of getting a free concert here. It was kind of nice. We had a beer together. It was great. But by being there at that granular level, even if I don't have an answer, my staff knows that I can relate to the situation they're in, and we're going to go figure it out. And then at the end of the day, that gives them a reason to trust me and a reason to take a risk on repositioning an asset or take a risk on, moving out people who are really not following community policies, maybe not creating a safe environment. They know that I'm going to do that in a way where I minimize the risk to them, while at the same time doing what's right for the rest of the families at the property. So that's the path I encourage for you. But I encourage it because how old are you, Chris?
I'm 30 years old now.
So you're 30. So you're still a whippersnapper in my book.
Yeah.
So you got lots of time. You're already a full-time real estate professional. You're not afraid of rolling up your sleeves and doing the work. It's not the advice that I would give that I've probably recently given someone who might be at a different stage in life. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Makes complete sense.
All right, so fire away. What else? We've got here a little bit of time left, and I've kind of led the conversation, but you have your own podcast. We're actually recording it simultaneously.
Yep.
So take over for me, and I'll be your guest and ask questions or whatever else it might be. Talk about what you want.
Yeah, sounds good. So kind of like I mentioned when I was talking to my investor friend who wants to give me money to buy single families, but we both were stuck on, well, where do we even begin? I guess you've probably answered this question on several other episodes, so I apologize if it's a beginner question. But other than the book that you gave me, which I have it in my bag over there, maybe you can drop the name if you remember what it's called off the top of your head.
Sure, it's The Complete Guide to Buying and Selling Apartment Buildings by Steve Burgess. Was really a transformational book for me. Eventually had the honor of Steve coming to work for me as an employee for a number of years. He did a great job as my chief investment officer. But to me, it's a foundational book for a new apartment owner.
Awesome. So that would be where you recommend people start, read and understand and study that book. And then step 2, in terms of how do you even begin to fathom what to do to get to that apartment? Because I guess maybe I just need to think a little bit bigger, because here I am thinking, okay, one house, I see it. It's easy to put my hands on. I can access it myself as a real estate agent. An apartment seems like, it's a different language, different terminology. You're looking at the cap rates and all those types of things. Do you have any suggestions or advice for someone in my level who is on the residential side? Where do we even begin to look other than reading a couple of books and resources like that? Is it talking about raising money from friends and family? Is it learning more about how to understand the numbers behind a deal? Is there a certain order that we should go
Absolutely.
about it in?
I've helped a lot of people with their first time apartment purchase. So it's a great question, and it's it's a question I never get tired of answering because it's logical that a person is going to go, man, if I start on the wrong end of this, I'm just going to fall in some big hole, because it sounds scary because there's a lot of zeros on these deals. But here's the thing. You can go back to the various episodes on the podcast that I have of the show, and I'm going to give you some names that you'll see that'll pop up right away. For our listeners today, we talked about going to Chris's website, which is chrisbello.com. Check out his entrepreneurial webcast / podcast / whatever kind of cast you're supposed to call it. I don't know all the right words. And learn more about him. If you want to go to ours and find the episodes I'm talking about right now, go to realestateriches.com and you can find it there, or just search under that show name or my name, Trey Stone, when you're on Spotify or Apple or Google. But if you go back to those, you'll see a lady that's actually about to come on the show, Charlene Nixon. You'll see episodes I've done with Russell Jones. You'll see episodes that I've done with Tom Wilkinson. These are some of the multifamily brokers that specialize in this space, in multifamily brokerage, like what you do with houses right now. And the difference is that unlike single family, where it's sort of democratized, right? You have the multiple listing service, you have other services that pull data, whether it be Zillow, there's lots of other tools you can use to try to pull comps, even if you're not a realtor. And so you have access to a large amount of data. And to an extent, there's a low barrier to entry for someone to become a real estate agent. I'm not saying anybody can do it. I'm not saying that the transition from not an agent to an agent, or from an agent to a broker, or from a broker to a successful broker aren't difficult steps that not everybody can accomplish. Certainly they are. But what I'm saying is that it's low barriers to entry. It's pretty easy to go through, from a time perspective, what you need to get through those tests, and then to be able to go get licensed, and you can access the information right away. With multifamily, it's basically the exact opposite of that. There's a service called LoopNet that you can go to that'll have a lot of these properties. And if you want to be the highest bidder and buy according to the greater fool theory, go buy a property from LoopNet. Horrible decision to make. Why? Because any deal that's available to you on LoopNet is deals that guys like myself have already passed on at anywhere close to the price that seller would accept. So those are kind of the sucker deals for people that are going to go overpay and pay what I paid in the beginning, kind of the newbie tax, where you overpay because you don't really know. Yeah. So what you do as an experienced buyer is you go to this handful of brokers that, the old 80-20 rule, right? 80% of the business getting done by 20% of the people, especially in this world. You're probably not going to be doing A deals if you're buying them as an independent owner. Some people do Class D properties. I'm going to tell you, stay away from that. There's a whole lot of different reasons for that. So you're probably going to be in that Class B, Class C space 90% of the time as an independent multifamily owner. Independent owner is what the apartment association classifies guys like me and you that go buy properties versus the big corporations like Camden, which Rick Campo is a great guy that started Camden, nothing against them, but they have a totally different institutional capital business model. They're publicly traded. They can do a bond issue to raise capital at 1%, all kinds of crazy stuff that you and I can't go do, right? So for the yields we need to make our business work, we're going to be in that BC space. And for that, there's a dozen people in Houston that do like 99% of those transactions. And I just gave you some of their names, and they're right there on the podcast. And every one of those episodes, they give you their contact information. Awesome. Not only that, but for you all, help make that a warm introduction. So you're going to go to them, and they're going to show you deals. At the same time, go back to those same podcasts, a little self-promotional here, but seriously, it's right there. Go to Michael Thompson, who's been on the show. Go to David Schwartz, who's been on the show. Those are guys that have done billions and billions of dollars in financing for apartments. And what we're going to do is we're going to get you pre-qualified. Now, everybody I talk to that's at your stage says, wait a minute, how am I going to get pre-qualified? I don't have $10 million to go buy an apartment complex. I know, but that's okay. What we have to find out is how strong of a key principal or sponsor are you going to be? So if we make the assumption that you can find the money, if we make the assumption that you can raise the money, I can help teach you to raise the money. The question becomes, yes, but based on your experience, your background, your credit, your level of education, your related experience, whatever you want to call it, where do they guide you as far as about what size deal would they recommend that you get into for that first deal? It might even be a scenario where they say, well, really, Chris, whether it's anything above 4 units where it's a multifamily contract, not the 1 to 4 standard track contract, we're going to tell you that you need to have somebody else to serve as your key principal in that first deal, even if you can raise all the money in the world. And then you go, okay, well, let me go find that person. And then we'll work through that process. But more than likely, If you want to start out with a deal that's, say anywhere from 50 units to 200 units, and you can find the access to the capital from people that listen to your podcast, people that you know that want to get into a deal with you, and you're willing to do it like I did my first deal for no fee. I mean, you might charge a property management fee, but I didn't charge a percentage of that transaction put together. I'm like, you're not going to pay for my learning curve when I'm putting a deal together. Hey, I've got mentors. I'm going to be a success with it. And I was in that first deal, but I'm not going to charge you for information and knowledge that I'm actually benefiting from as well in the beginning. So if you can be willing to do that, I think you'll find people will go in with you, especially if you put whatever you can scrape together in it, because that way they see you're all in. Like they always say on Shark Tank, I like that this guy's all in, right? When they put all their money into the business, right, and they're really focused on it. So I think if we do that, we're going to get some guidance from them about what type of property, what size property you qualify for. Then at the same time, we're going to talk to those brokers and get you out to see some of the ones that are for sale and see what your risk tolerance is, what areas of town you're comfortable in, what you're familiar with, and that's going to help us start to narrow down on what the profile would be. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to put together a business plan for you that has certain fundamental metrics that a property has to meet or you will not buy it. I know you're an analytical guy. I know you're a spreadsheet guy. I'm willing to bet that if you were to give somebody advice on buying an investment property that was single family, that you would already have some of those metrics right off the top of your head that you could give them for it to even be a possibility that they should consider buying that property. Those things can be developed for multifamily investments as well. So we could help you put that plan together. That way you don't make a subjective decision that's emotionally based in the heat of the moment, but instead you have an objective way to evaluate whether a property really meets your criteria or not. You know whether you would qualify to buy it or not. You know how much money you would have to raise, so you can start doing that in parallel. So sorry that wasn't like a one-sentence answer, but it is an answer. It is specific, and we can absolutely go do those things. And maybe we can share that journey on this show and on your show as people see you do it.
Yeah, that sounds really exciting. Wait, can you say that again? I'm just kidding. I'll listen to this episode.
I think we both have a
again.
podcast. We can go hear it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the beauty of podcasts, is we can just rewind this and then play it back. And I know we're almost there on time. We've got a couple of minutes, but I guess a quick question. Just, I know the audience can take a lot away from this one, and I'm having this struggle myself with my business. I have a couple of virtual assistants, nowhere near a property management level just yet. But how often do you check in with your team? I mean, I know you manage the managers, but I guess I'm struggling with that right now on what do I ask them? How do I check in? Do you have a process for that, or is it kind of just like a gut feeling of what you think you need to talk to them about?
So what I do is I keep a spreadsheet like you keep for everything. I've got a spreadsheet for everything, and I have a tab. And each tab is got the name of one of my direct reports. And what I do is I keep a list on each one of those tabs in that spreadsheet that gives me an idea of like what's kind of the short-term day-to-day objectives that I'm waiting for them to get back to me on.
Okay.
And what are some of those bigger picture objectives. I also use a product called Microsoft To Do. I subscribe to Microsoft 365, both for myself and for each of my employees. I purchase a user account for each of them, and it comes with that 365 product. And what it is just a basic program for lists. But what I'm able to do is I create a list within To Do for each one of those employees. And then I share that link to that list with them. Okay. So every time they get something done, they can go click it as done, but our rule is they can't delete it. Because I want to see they said it was done, and I want to follow up and make sure I think it was done to my satisfaction before I then remove it from the list entirely, and they can immediately see when I give them a new assignment of something that pops up. On top of that, I'm a big fan of face-to-face. In this world, a lot of people don't do that anymore, but I get out to my properties. I was out at one this week, and we get face-to-face, and we walk units, and there's no substitute for that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Trey.
Thank you. It's been a blast, and I look forward to maybe doing some more stuff together. I think we have a marketing call that I'm asking you to join coming up here with a couple of consultants that help me market and grow my business, and I want to try to learn from you more about online digital marketing and podcasting and everything else. So for those of you through Chris's show, look over the camera for a minute. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it. Chris, thank you for the opportunity to be on your show. I appreciate that.
Thank you very much, Trey.
So for those of you listening to KSEV, we'll be back as always this Saturday with the next episode of Real Estate Riches, and then back Thursdays at 1 next week as well. I hope all of you had a happy and healthy holiday season and are ready to have a much better 2021 than we had in 2020. And in the meantime, wish you all the best of luck. Thank you for listening, and God bless you.